We begin first with the bracha for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, who makes us holy with mitzvot and commands us to engage in words of Torah. This week's Parsha is called Parshat Terumah because, as usual, that is the first distinctive word in the Parsha. Begins, Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe Lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying, Daber el b'nei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, v'ikhu li terumah, they shall take to me terumah, they shall take to me a donation, an offering, they shall take to me gifts, and you shall accept gifts for me, says God, from every person whose heart so moves him. And these are the gifts that you shall accept from them: gold, silver, and copper, blue, purple, and crimson yarns, fine linen, goat's hair, tanned ram skins, dolphin skins, and acacia wood, oil for lighting, spices for the anointing oil and for the aromatic incense, lapis lazuli, and other stones for setting for the ephod and for the breastpiece. The asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, and have them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell amidst them. Have them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell in their midst. So on a simple level, that verse is packed. Let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. On the one hand, the people are being told, donate these things from yourself, all those whose hearts move you. Bring this from yourself and build me a sanctuary, build me a tent of meeting so I can dwell in the midst of the camp. I can dwell in the middle of you. Or build me a structure and I will dwell in you who are building it, inside of each of you. This verse, the more we look at it, speaks to the issue of structure and spirit. And in many ways, this is at the heart of a Reconstructionist approach to Judaism, any approach to Judaism, but in particular also it's at the heart of a Reconstructionist approach to Judaism, and as such, it is at the heart of what we are as Temple Beth Shalom. All of spiritual life needs to exist within a structure. All religious community needs some form of structure. We build structure for our communities, forms of leadership, methods of decision-making, everything we need to be community. And then within that structure, we live out our communal lives. All religious practice needs some sort of structure. We create rituals that we perform in order to express inner meaning. In so many ways, we create structures to house our spiritual lives: homes, schools, synagogues, organizations, ceremonies. We also build concepts, like the concept of what is Judaism. And all of Reconstructionist Judaism is built around a central concept, an idea that Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. The evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. Sometimes I think I don't talk about that enough because people can't recite that already so many times. The evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. All of Reconstructionist Judaism is built around the question, what is Judaism? And the claim, Judaism is a civilization. Judaism is a peoplehood and a culture. We have a common history, specific languages, art and music, our own alphabet and literature, food and culture, our own calendar, our own law, our own central land, whether we relate to it from the diaspora or by being present in it. We have our own folklore. We have religion. And just as you can speak of Christendom as a civilization or the Islamic world as a civilization, so you can also speak of Jewish civilization. And Jewish civilization is a religious civilization. It addresses questions of meaning and purpose. And it is an evolving civilization. It has changed throughout the course of history, but it still is one cultural continuum. And to say that the Jews are a people with their own culture or cultures may seem obvious to most of us now, but it was not obvious to everyone a century ago. Going back even to the early 1800s in Western Europe, Jews used to be forced to live in ghettos surrounded by walls. We did not create those structures. We were forced into them. But at the time of Napoleon, whenever he invaded one of those many countries he invaded, he let the Jews out of the ghetto in the name of French liberty, equality, and fraternity. And after the defeat of Napoleon, many parts of Europe declined to put the Jews back into the ghettos. From that time on, more and more Jews were living as part of the larger European society to one degree or another. And as a result, Jewish community itself had to be redefined. The structures of the community broke down and began to change. And Napoleon had imposed his own vision on the Jews of Europe in exchange for greater access to the larger society. Literally, he imposed it. Napoleon insisted that the Jews of France see themselves as a religion only, a religious group only, not at all as a people. Napoleon wanted the Jews of France to understand themselves as French people, not Jewish people. Just as many French people were Catholic and some French people were Protestants, so also now some French people were Jews by religion only. And French people of Jewish religion were not to feel a bond of peoplehood with other Jews, nor were they to feel a connection to the land of Israel, nor were they to be patriots or compatriots of any other nation or land other than France. Napoleon even gathered together a council of Jewish leaders of France, which he called a Sanhedrin. And he asked that Sanhedrin to decide and pronounce that the Jews were not a people, but only a religion. And that group of Jewish leaders did just that. It was Napoleon, after all, the emperor. It's hard to imagine they would have done anything different. Yet, after the fall of Napoleon, Europe moved on into the 19th century, and this idea of Judaism as only a religion and Jews as only a group of loosely connected co-religionists became the dominant Jewish self-understanding in Western Europe. It became a key doctrine of Reform Judaism, which was the major accommodation of Western Jews to being in the modern world. And so Reform Judaism developed around the idea that Judaism was only a religion, not a people. It needs to be said that in the 20th century, the Reform movement rethought that, but at this time, Judaism was seen only as a religion within a reform approach, with no connection to the ancient land of the non-existent Jewish people. They no longer felt a connection to the land of Israel. So when they built large, beautiful synagogues in Europe, they called them temples because they had no special connection to a temple site in Zion. Our temples are here in France or Germany, not in the land of Israel. Reform Jews knew very well that anti-Semitism was still a strong factor in European society, which is why it was so important that they be able to show that Judaism was not only the most ancient of faiths, but also the most modern. And that meant that Judaism needed to be the most rational. So Reform Judaism was built around the idea that the idea was the most important aspect of religion. Rational religion was belief in an idea that upheld an ideal morality. Jewish teachers searched for some sort of model around which to reform Judaism, and mostly they came up with Protestantism. Just as Protestantism had broken with Catholicism, jettisoning off seemingly medieval practices for a purer, more streamlined, more idea-centered form of Judaism, so did Reform Judaism jettison orthodoxy with its many seemingly medieval practices, and Reform Judaism became a faith centering around the idea of ethical monotheism and a commitment to ethics and the quest for a purer, more streamlined essence of Judaism. And when German Jews came to America, they largely brought with them this form of Jewish self-understanding, and they planted Reform Judaism on these shores by the end of the 19th century. But this was not the only self-understanding of Judaism developing in the 19th century. In Eastern Europe, there remained a strong sense that the Jews were a people, just perhaps not in any way a religion. Yes, you had forms of Orthodox Jewish religion among Jews, but in Eastern Europe, you also had Yiddishists who emphasized Jewish culture built around Yiddish language and literature, territorialists who emphasized the need to find a land for a country for the Jewish people somewhere in the world, Zionists who emphasized that that land had to be the land of Israel, Bundists who insisted that Jews should join in with workers of all peoples to create a better utopian socialist world. You had varieties of these approaches depending on whether you lived in Germany or Austro-Hungary or Russia, which were just about your only three possibilities in Eastern Europe at the time, since all the other countries pretty much were subsumed by those three empires. And in particular, as political and social conditions became critically worse in Russia, beginning in 1881, Jews started leaving Eastern Europe in massive numbers, heading largely to the United States, and especially in great numbers to New York. Leaving Russia, especially rural areas of Russia, and coming to America meant effectively leaving the Middle Ages and arriving into a highly urbanized form of modernity. The culture shock would have been enormous. Additionally, in Russia, there was structure to Jewish community life that had existed for almost 500 years. In America, there was hardly any Jewish institutional structure to begin with. In 1875, there was founded one rabbinical college as of 1875. The first rabbinical college in America started in Cincinnati, when Cincinnati was arguably the geographic center of the 250,000 Jews in the United States at that time. But that one college did not remain a point of unity for long. The form of Judaism taught there was highly reform. At the banquet celebrating the first graduating class of rabbis, they served pork and shellfish topped off by ice cream. The traditionalists broke away, and this form of Judaism developing out of Cincinnati would not speak to these newly arriving Russian Jews, whether they were religious or agnostic. On another side of the spectrum, we have the chief rabbi of New York. I don't know who here has heard of the chief rabbi of New York. Most people have never heard of the chief rabbi of New York. There was only one chief rabbi of New York, Rabbi Jacob Joseph, a scholar from Vilna, who was brought to America by some Orthodox communities in 1888 to be the chief rabbi. It was an experiment that did not work. And after he died in 1902, there never was another chief rabbi of New York. But there is a Reconstructionist connection to Rabbi Jacob Joseph, the one and only chief rabbi of New York, because another rabbi was brought over from Europe to work with Rabbi Joseph. And that was Rabbi Israel Kaplan, who arrived in New York with his family in 1889. And with him was his 8-year-old son, Mordechai. And perhaps you recognize that name, Mordechai Kaplan, who became the founder of Reconstructionism, as well as of many other institutions in the American Jewish world. Institutions of the American Jewish world, we're talking about structure. These structures were still in formation when Mordechai Kaplan was growing up in the Jewish community of New York. At different times in his childhood, he attended one of the yeshivas that later became Yeshiva University. And then he attended the Jewish Theological Seminary long before there was any such thing as the conservative movement. And he later spent some years in Eastern Europe, where he was ordained as an Orthodox rabbi by Isaac Reines, who later founded religious Zionism. And while serving as an Orthodox rabbi in New York, he was invited by Solomon Schechter to be dean of the Teachers College of the newly reorganized Jewish Theological Seminary, where he served from 1909 to 1962. In 1912, he founded an Orthodox Jewish movement still in existence today called Young Israel. In 1913, he participated in the founding of the conservative movement organized around the Jewish Theological Seminary. Mordechai Kaplan was a pioneer in the Jewish summer camp movement. He inspired the establishment of Camp Ramah and the University of Judaism in Los Angeles, and was part of various other efforts to build structure in the American Jewish world, and to build greater understanding and clarity for American Jews around the question, what is Judaism? As he continued to teach and preach, he formulated a response to that question. In his response, Judaism is the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. We Jews are, first of all, a people. As with any people, we have an entire tradition of culture and folklore, practices, teachings, and ways that are also religious. And this religious civilization did not just fall down to us out of the sky. It developed out of the life of our people, just as do all cultures and civilizations develop out of the life of a people. We have a religious culture which gives expression to particular values and understandings of what it looks like to live a moral and spiritual life. As a community and as a people, it is our obligation, our mitzvah, to nurture that religious culture and to develop it as we live with it. We need to live in constant, ongoing conversation with it. We need to listen to it and hear as in Shema, so that it can guide us. And we need to argue with it in a Talmudic way when necessary to keep it sharp and alive. In doing this, we are collecting up the stuff of our lives, our insights, and our sense of who we are. And we are building a structure out of the stuff of our lives so that we can encounter the divine presence within it. Just as in the passage of Torah I read tonight, we bring gifts from ourselves, and with those gifts we build a sanctuary so that the divine presence can dwell among us. And we need to do this in community so that we are not only talking to ourselves, we need to hear what each other is hearing in our tradition so that we can be guided in the fullest possible way. And we need to relate to Judaism not only as an idea, but as a living culture. To do that, we must engage in practice and ritual, as well as ethics, so that we can comprehend on an experiential level what our traditions are teaching us, and also so that we stay together as community. As Mordechai Kaplan was figuring this out for himself and for others, he realized that he himself needed a community to do this with. He needed a community who would live as Jews and would experiment with different ways to practice Judaism in this radically new, rapidly changing modern time, while still maintaining contact with tradition. More than that, while still being guided by tradition. In the Reconstructionist movement, that is what a congregation does, and that is what makes us a movement. In the Reconstructionist movement, a congregation is a focal point for Torah-making activity, for a process of living out and developing Jewish tradition and civilization further. It is as if each congregation is a node on the tree of life, that is Judaism, where creativity and innovation rooted in tradition are worked out. Each Reconstructionist Jewish congregation is a hothouse for the development of new forms and functions of Jewish civilization. Mordechai Kaplan needed to invent this sort of community, and I am not entirely sure how it came together, where he found the people willing to do this with him, or how he inspired them. But it was 100 years ago last week that this first Reconstructionist Jewish community convened in response to all of what I've just tried to summarize. The first Reconstructionist Friday night service was held on January 27th, 1922. And to really make the point about the purpose and mission of that congregation, it was named the Society for the Advancement of Judaism. The Society for the Advancement of Judaism. The SAJ still exists in New York today, and it is celebrating its centenary. I do want us to think about the name of that first Reconstructionist Jewish congregation and what it means. Each Reconstructionist congregation is called upon to be a society for the advancement of Judaism in its own way. Each community considers issues about how to be Jewish in our day. We are called upon constantly to examine the values that guide us, name the values that grow out of our tradition, wrestle with teachings that might trouble us, and discern from this a Torah way that guides us and honors Jewish tradition and advances all of us together. The Reconstructionist movement as a whole will at times poll congregations to hear what it is that we have learned along our ways and share those insights with each other. The shared vision behind all of this is that together we are reconstructing Judaism. And of course, Reconstructing Judaism is the name of the central organization of the movement, the organization that encompasses both the Federation of Congregations and the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College. Together, we are reconstructing Judaism so that we and all of Jewish civilization can live into our highest vision of ourselves. And what we develop today becomes tradition tomorrow. Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. Let them build me a sanctuary that I may dwell amongst them. Let us be conscious of this process that we are engaged in. We at Temple Beth Shalom are celebrating our own 50th anniversary, and it's stretched a little bit into several years because of circumstances beyond our control, but it's our 50th anniversary. Let us embrace this calling to build up Jewish lives and Jewish tradition together and invite others in to engage in this process with us. We bring contributions from our lives to build this structure together. As we do this in community, we evolve, but remain anchored in our heritage, creating sparks of living Torah in our midst. Vasuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham. They shall build me a sanctuary that I may dwell amongst them. Shabbat Shalom.